These are our headlines this Thursday afternoon, August 17th in Korea. After saying his final farewell to his late father, President Yoon is set to depart for the United States for the trilateral summit with Washington and Tokyo at Camp David. Many are hoping the three countries can make a breakthrough in strengthening security alliances at what's anticipated to be a historic meetup. The United States has imposed sanctions on three entities believed to have brokered arms deals between North Korea and Russia. South Korea is trying to speed up its economic recovery, mainly by easing regulations on investments. Officials said they would support new industries like AI semiconductors and urban air mobility.
Good afternoon. I'm Shin-Yeun, filling in for Min Sunny. Starting with news on President Yoon Suk-yeol, President Yoon will depart for the U.S. later today to meet with U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at Camp David on Friday. This comes after sending off his late father on the last day of the three-day mourning period. The president's father was brought to a cemetery in Gyeonggi-do Province just outside Seoul this morning. Yoon Ki-jung, a professor emeritus of Yonsei University, died on Tuesday at the age of 92. Ahead of the Camp David summit, officials from both the presidential office in Seoul and the White House are hoping that Friday's summit will lead to a historic milestone. They're specifically looking forward to ambitious initiatives on the security front. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young tells us more.
The leaders of South Korea, the United States and Japan will pave the way for a new era of security and economic initiatives in the Indo-Pacific region as they gather at a landmark meeting at Camp David on Friday. That's according to a senior official in comments to Arirang News before President Yoon Suk-yeol sets off Thursday for the US. As the three countries face growing nuclear and missile threats from North Korea and economic uncertainties, the summit is to institutionalize a mechanism for greater cooperation based on their shared values of freedom, peace and prosperity. White House officials also remarked on Wednesday local time that the three countries will set three-way cooperation into motion with ambitious initiatives in the leaders' joint statement. White House Indo-Pacific Chief Kurt Campbell said the document would include making three-way talks between the leaders an annual occasion, along with efforts to invest in a three-way crisis hotline between them. While such measures would stop short of forming an official security arrangement, Campbell said the three-way efforts would become a defining trilateral relationship for the 21st century. Korean and US officials in recent days said the framework for cooperation will include regular annual joint military drills, possibly including missile interception training, cyber defense, and a real-time missile warning system. North Korea last year tested at least 65 missiles and has fostered its asymmetric capabilities. White House National Security Council official John Kirby has said the three countries are also expected to tighten cooperation beyond military to diverse areas. Experts say a key area will be supply chain cooperation, particularly on sensitive technologies and rare minerals.
They'll be pushing to continue the so-called de-risking policy of trying to reduce dependency on China for rare earth minerals and other important components, and particularly semiconductors there, of course.
The three-way talks on Friday will be an unprecedented standalone event between Washington and its two allies, compared to previous gatherings which have taken place on the sidelines of other multilateral summits or conferences. Inspired by the venue of the summit, the leaders are also expected to issue a separate vision statement dubbed the Camp David Principles according to Axios. While it's likely there'll be a mention of protecting the rule-based world order and possibly peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, a Yoon official has said the document is not likely to issue words confronting China. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now on to the summit's venue, Camp David. The U.S. presidential retreat has a history of holding landmark summits and discussions, and Yoon will become the first South Korean leader to visit in 15 years. My colleague Jae-myung has this report.
In 2008, former President Lee Myung-bak became the first South Korean president to visit Camp David, the U.S. presidential country retreat, at the invitation of then U.S. leader George Bush. Driving in a golf cart, the two leaders boasted their friendship and promised a stronger alliance. Camp David holds a special meaning in international diplomacy. For more than 80 years, the residence has been used to host summits and intimate diplomatic negotiations. In 1943, the United Kingdom's Prime Minister Winston Churchill attended the first such meeting to discuss the Second World War with U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In 1978, leaders of Egypt and Israel held peace talks mediated by the U.S. in what we now know as the Camp David Accords. On August 18th, President Biden will host South Korea's President Yoon and Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the venue for their first ever standalone summit. Biden has visited the retreat dozens of times since taking office, but had never invited a foreign leader. U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said last week that Camp David has been a historic setting for summits and for foreign policy conversations, and added that Biden is looking forward to hosting a discussion of historic proportions. An expert pointed out that the trilateral meeting set to be held at the presidential retreat is in stark contrast to North Korea, China, and Russia's display of solidarity at the recent military parade held in Pyongyang.
It shows South Korea, the US, and Japan do not only pursue military alliances, but also solidarity that pursues universal human values like freedom, peace, human rights, prosperity, and the rule of law. To achieve this, they are strengthening solidarity in a fairly relaxed atmosphere.
All eyes are now on whether Friday's gathering at Camp David will mark a new era in Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo's trilateral cooperation. Jae-myung, Arirang News.
The United States has slapped sanctions on 3 entities thought to have brokered arms deals between North Korea and Russia. This is a part of Washington's efforts to restrict Moscow's war efforts against Ukraine. Lee Seung-jae with more.
The U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Controls announced on Wednesday that it has imposed fresh sanctions against 3 entities involved in illicit arms deals between North Korea and Russia. The department issued sanctions against Velrus LLC, Defense Engineering LLP, and Versor SRO. The 3 companies are all either owned or led by Slovakian national Ashot Merkichev. The Slovakian was also sanctioned back on March 30, 2023, for attempting to facilitate arms trade between Pyongyang and Moscow. In its press release, the department stressed that the latest sanctions are a part of the continuing U.S. strategy to identify, expose, and disrupt third country actors seeking to support Russia's brutal war against Ukraine. Speculation that the Kremlin and North Korea might be looking to trade arms comes as Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu visited Pyongyang as part of a delegation that marked the 70th anniversary of the Korean War armistice last month. Pundits say Shoigu's visit may indicate increasing military cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow. The U.S. Treasury Department also noted that Russia has increasingly been forced to turn to North Korea to continue and sustain its war against Ukraine as it expends munitions and loses heavy equipment on the battlefield. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The White House says the U.S. is seeking and will continue to seek the safe return of U.S. soldier Private Travis King, who crossed into North Korea last month. It also dismissed the regime's claim that the soldier was seeking refuge in the north. That's according to the National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby, on Thursday, who said those claims have got to be looked at skeptically. He added that Washington still wants to know the soldier's whereabouts and safety, and that the U.S. has made it clear to the north that it wants the soldier back. On Wednesday, North Korea's state-run media reported Pyongyang's first public confirmation of Travis King, saying he sought refuge there or in a third country, citing maltreatment and racial discrimination by the U.S. Army. And over in Hawaii, the death toll from the Maui wildfires is now 110. Local residents have released videos capturing what is thought to be the moment the fire started. Our Kim Jung-sil with the latest.
A video that might have captured the start of the deadly wildfires in Maui.
Oh, this is live right across the street from my house. Freaking power line just went down. Tried my little water hose, but I hear a pop coming from across the street, and shortly after, thing was just arcing away on the ground, landed right in dry grass, so sparks, and then there was a fire.
He said he saw a fire break out across from his house at dawn on Tuesday, the same time that officials estimated that the initial fire broke out. His video captures images of the fire becoming even larger, burning the dry grass on the ground. Shane True says in just a matter of minutes, the whole place was engulfed by fire. AP News reported that his video has emerged as key evidence of what might have started the fire. There are other videos, such as CCTV cameras, that captured a moment of a tree falling down on an electric line and a fire starting not long after that. A lawsuit has already been filed against the local electric company, Hawaiian Electric. Due to the nature of the disaster, identifying the victims has become a challenge. Only 5 of the dead had been identified, according to officials. Hawaii Governor Josh Green has said that 27% of the search and rescue is complete and that he hopes much will be covered by the weekend. The death toll will likely rise as residents of the town of Lahaina say many seniors lived in complexes in the area where the fire hit. The residents told local media that they know only a handful of people who managed to escape, suggesting there might be more victims from the senior complexes. The White House announced on Wednesday that U.S. President Joe Biden and his wife will be visiting Maui on Monday, where they'll meet first responders, survivors, as well as local officials. 김정실, Arirang News.
Staying on Maui, the South Korean government on Wednesday delivered the first portion of emergency aid to Hawaii. South Korean Consul General to Honolulu, Lee So-young, delivered the aid to Hawaii Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke. This is part of the South Korean government's aid relief to Maui to help local people get back on with their lives as soon as possible. The emergency aid included water, food, and blankets, as well as power generators, as requested by Hawaii's local authorities. Earlier this week, the South Korean government pledged to provide Hawaii with $2 million worth of humanitarian aid. The South Korean government is trying to boost its own economic recovery, mainly by easing regulations on investments in the tech industry for AI and flying cars. Officials are also trying to increase assistance for exports, like in the tourism sector. Our Lee Soo-jin has the details.
South Korea's government is taking further steps to not only boost exports, but also investment. Finance Minister Chu Kyo-ho on Thursday held an emergency meeting on the economy with related ministers and said that although the nation's export downturn is starting to level out, the government will continue to strengthen efforts to achieve a quicker economic recovery. One way the government is planning to do this is by promoting promising new industries such as AI semiconductors and urban air mobility. The measures include building data centers that utilize AI chips, as well as increasing financial support for startups that produce system semiconductors. The Finance Ministry also said that it will work with related ministries to build a frequency specific to the UAM industry as part of its efforts to boost Korea's presence in the global UAM market. The battery market is another area that the government is planning to promote. The Finance, Trade, and the Environment Ministries will work together to expand the reuse and recycling of batteries. The government will also make efforts to encourage investment.
Increasing investment along with exports is very important in achieving a quick economic recovery.
To boost eco-friendly investment, South Korea will introduce safety standards so that hydrogen charging stations can be established in areas frequented by a lot of drivers to make hydrogen cars more convenient. The Finance Ministry also said that it will speed up its efforts to create an advanced biotech cluster in Osong, a town that the government has been seeking to develop as a biomedical hub to increase investment in biotechnology. The government will also soon unveil measures in response to China lifting its ban on group tours to South Korea.
We will promptly prepare measures, including making entry requirements easier to meet, as well as developing various tourist programs to attract Chinese tourists.
The Finance Ministry also said efforts will be made across the government to support a complete economic recovery. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
For the first time in more than 6 years, Beijing has lifted its ban on outbound group tours to South Korea. China had previously banned group tours to Seoul over the U.S. defense system called THAAD. Related industries, including tourism and retail, are busy preparing to welcome these tourists back. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young tells us how South Korea will benefit from this latest measure.
Local businesses such as those in tourism, cosmetics, and duty-free shops have welcomed China's latest move, which lifts a ban on Chinese tour groups. They're expecting sales to recover after being hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic and the drop in the number of tourists from China after restrictions were imposed 6 years ago.
We are expecting sales to improve with more Chinese tourists. We are preparing a variety of joint promotions with tourism businesses and airlines to enhance the shopping convenience for Chinese tourists.
I hope it provides an opportunity, especially for small business owners, to resume their operations.
Individual Chinese tourists have been able to travel to South Korea, but the big deal about the tour groups is how much they spend.
Data from the Korea Tourism Organization shows the number of Chinese tourists, which surpassed 8 million in 2016, was reduced by nearly half in 2017 due to the deployment of the U.S. missile defense system. Then the COVID-19 pandemic caused the numbers to plunge further. With Beijing allowing group tours to resume, Seoul's travel deficit is one of the key areas that is expected to see a recovery. The country's travel balance during the first half of this year recorded a $4.65 billion deficit, the biggest deficit for the same period since 2018. There has been a travel deficit for 22 consecutive years up to 2022. And South Korea could reach its 23rd year in the red if this trend continues, so all eyes are now on the Chinese tour groups. However, while an expert says there will be an improvement in South Korea's travel deficit, whether or not there is a return to a surplus remains uncertain as Chinese consumer behavior has changed.
Japan is one of the preferred travel destinations for Chinese tourists. This is due to its proximity, strong preference for Japanese products, and the depreciation of the Japanese yen. As the cost of living in China is low, it is dealing with deflationary concerns, while South Korea is experiencing relatively high inflation.
Meanwhile, after allowing group tours, in just one day on Friday, reservations were made for a total of 53 Chinese cruise ships to visit Jeju, meaning that more Chinese tourists are expected to visit South Korea from now on. Jae-myung, Arirang News.
South Korea plans to become a top 10 destination for studying by doubling its international student enrollment numbers through 2027. The Education Ministry revealed its plan on Wednesday to attract as many as 300,000 international students within the next 4 years. Currently, there are around 160,000 foreign students studying in South Korea. The government will focus on foreign students in the STEM fields, namely science, technology, and engineering and mathematics. The plan aims to address the nation's rapidly declining school-age population, as well as strengthen the country's global education competitiveness. On the local political front, the main opposition Democratic Party's chairman, Lee Jae-myung, appeared for questioning at the prosecutor's office earlier on Thursday amid allegations of a breach of trust. Lee is being accused of giving special developmental favors to a private contractor during the construction of apartment complexes in the Baekhyun-dong neighborhood of Seongnam City back in 2014 and 2015, while serving as the city's mayor. Although accused of receiving money in return, Lee is denying all allegations, saying that the investigation is being fabricated by the, quote, political prosecution. This is the fourth time Lee has been questioned by the prosecution and the first time in 6 months.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In the Black Sea, a Hong Kong-flagged cargo ship left the Ukrainian port city of Odessa on Wednesday, despite fears that the Russian Navy could target ships. The move is a first test of a humanitarian corridor announced by Kyiv last week that allows ships to leave its ports. It's mainly meant for vessels that have been trapped since Russia launched its invasion in February 2022. Russia has not said whether it will respect the corridor and launched an attack on Ukrainian grain storage facilities in Reni as the ship departed. On Sunday, Russia fired warning shots at and boarded a Palau-flagged cargo vessel heading toward Ukraine to search for weapons. In July, Moscow pulled out of a UN-brokered grain deal that guaranteed safe passage for ships carrying foodstuffs across the Black Sea. The Kremlin has since warned that ships going to Ukrainian ports could be considered a military target. In eastern Pakistan, a mob made up of thousands of Muslims attacked and burned several churches and homes belonging to Christians over allegations that 2 Christian men desecrated the Quran. The attacks took place in Jaranwala on Wednesday after claims the men had written insults and derogatory remarks in the Muslim holy book. No casualties have been reported, but the government has deployed police officers and the army to calm the situation. Dozens of rioters have been arrested and an investigation has been launched. Blasphemy is punishable by death in Pakistan, a country where over 95% of the population are Muslims. In the United Kingdom, the British Museum announced on Wednesday that it had fired a staff member amid reports of items going missing, being stolen or damaged. Among the items are gold, jewelry and semi-precious stones, dating as far back as the 15th century BC. Most of the items were kept in a storeroom for research purposes. The items had reportedly gone missing before 2023 and over a significant period of time. The museum said it is reviewing its security practices and is working to recover the missing treasures. The police are also investigating, but no arrests have been made yet. It's not the first time valuable items have gone missing from the museum. In 2017, the institute announced that it had lost a diamond Cartier ring valued at almost $1 million. And finally, European champions England are set to face Spain in the 2023 Women's World Cup final after beating Australia 3-1 in Sydney on Wednesday. The Lionesses were the first to draw blood in an entertaining encounter before the Matildas, fighting to keep their World Cup dreams alive, equalised in the second half through a superb individual effort by star striker Sam Kerr. But the tournament co-hosts were ultimately sent home after England sealed their domination with another 2 goals. England will now face Spain in Sydney on Sunday in the first World Cup final match for both teams. Australia take on Sweden on Saturday in Brisbane in the third-place playoff. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Searing heat usually subsides after Liberation Day here in Korea, and it surely did. Mornings and evenings have gotten a lot more bearable, but in terms of afternoon heat, it doesn't want to go away just yet. Top temperatures are slightly higher than norms under mostly sunny skies in most parts, but we still can rule out the chance of 5 to 60 millimeters of passing rain, and southern inland areas will be seeing heavier passing showers during the day with thunder and lightning. So along with the heat, there will be moisture in the air. And feels like temperatures are a couple of degrees higher than what the thermometer indicates this afternoon. Daily highs are hovering in the low 30s again. Dress light and drink plenty of water. In fact, afternoon temperatures will stay sweltering for the remainder of the month. Meanwhile, brace for frequent passing rain and please keep an umbrella handy. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for you at this hour. Do stay with us for our panel session on the much-anticipated trilateral summit between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. As for the Daily Report, we'll see you again tomorrow at this hour.
Hello, I'm Jae-myung, Ambassador of Slovenia to the Republic of Korea. Right now, I see Korea shining in the world. Korea has many strengths, and the global presence is already here. Slovenia will continue to establish the presence in the international scene. This is also one of the reasons why we opened the embassy in Korea last year. I always thank Arirang TV for playing a big role in promoting Korean information to the world so that many people can access Korean content and get to know all aspects of Korean culture. I hope that people around the world will continue to communicate and sympathize with Korea. Resonating the world, Arirang.
We deliver stories on site. From Korea to the world, and from the world to Korea. We ask questions every day that could change the world. Taking news a step further, Arirang News. You're watching Arirang News. You're watching Arirang.
Contour the world, simply contour. India, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. Woo!
I'm excited. You excited?
Of course.
Yeah.
Music, start.
The leaders of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan are making their way to Camp David on Friday for their first ever standalone summit. How will the three leaders build and polish a trilateral cooperative mechanism to tackle North Korea and other regional challenges? What does it mean for the three sides to regularize their trilateral summit? And what lingering issues are we seeing both at home and abroad ahead of Japan's release of the Fukushima wastewater? Good afternoon, and today we take a look at Korea in the global headlines, including the much-anticipated trilateral summit between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. And joining us is Stephen Barwick. Welcome.
Thank you.
And also Malene Jensen. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Hi.
All right, Malene, let's start with you. What kind of topics are expected to top the agenda at the upcoming summit at Camp David this time?
Yes, so it is expected that South Korea and Japan and the United States will talk about joint initiatives on a number of different topics, technology and education and defense. But one of the main points are some of the regional challenges that are right now in Asia. And here is one of the key points, North Korea, where it's expected that, that there will be talk about what kind of defense initiatives to take against North Korea and whether the defense should be stepped up. Yeah, so those will be the main points for the summit.
Right, their mutual interests vary from economic cooperation to security issues, including North Korea issues, right?
Yes.
But the thing is, their defense cooperation is expected to sharpen even sharper. Now, how much more defined will it be, Stephen, this time?
Well, just on Tuesday in his Liberation Day speech, President Yoon referred pretty openly to the possibility of real-time missile and nuclear weapon defense information sharing. And that's just a pretty simple idea that, like, if troops of one of these three countries detect some kind of activity or a launch or some kind of movement, they would have a direct channel to right away share that information with their counterparts in the other countries. And this is the typical kind of thing that militaries do all the time. I think the question at the summit will be if they are able to kind of institutionalize this, if they're able to create a formal and durable mechanism that would allow this to continue indefinitely. And just like taking a step back, you would think this is just a kind of prudent measure. North Korea is going to continue. There's no sign that North Korea is going to stop carrying out weapons tests or, you know, really come forward for any kind of meaningful negotiations at any time soon. So I think that's the kind of modest but significant measure that the three countries it makes sense for them to pursue. And then the question after that will be if they can build on that for some kind of deeper or more comprehensive cooperation.
Right, then what will that mean? What will that mean for, in the eyes of China and North Korea, like you mentioned?
Well, it'll mean that these three democratic countries are coming together and that this kind of, if you look at East Asia on a map, if you look at the space between the Korean Peninsula and the Japanese archipelago, it means that, like, for other antagonistic countries who want to operate in that space is going to kind of shrink.
Right.
And there's going to be less room to maneuver. So I'm sure both China and North Korea would be displeased about this. China is pretty open about wanting to compete with the U.S. for room to maneuver and for domination in East Asia, and it tries to, in both coercive and non-coercive ways, it tries to encourage South Korea to take its side on a number of these issues. So, but the Yoon administration has been pretty boldly assertive in how he deals with China. Even before he was elected, like, a big part of his campaign was that he was going to take a tougher line on China. He was not going to leave Korea vulnerable to Chinese coercion or intimidation. And a lot of this comes down to, you know, so viewers can really understand what's behind a lot of this. This all comes down to those chips that are in your phone and in your car and in all these other things. The Chinese economy is very reliant on semiconductors from South Korea because Chinese companies, at least as of now, are not able to produce the kinds of very advanced semiconductors that South Korean firms can make. So even if officials in Beijing are quietly displeased with what South Korea is doing, I think it's unlikely that they're going to push back too decisively at this point.
Right, the fact that three are bonding more than ever can be seen as a threat to China especially, right?
Well, I hope they wouldn't see it as a threat exactly, because there's no reason for them to see it as a threat, because if you look specifically at what the South Korea and the U.S. and Japan are talking about, it's all quite defensive in nature. It's not as though they are getting together and they're saying we're going to figure out a way to invade China or invade North Korea. They're saying we are going to hold routine practice drills to be ready for the event of the contingency, and we are going to share information so that we can properly respond to any kind of aggressive act by these other countries. Just recently, I think it was a week ago, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said something about increasing missile production and encouraging military officials to think in an offensive way, which is kind of a departure from how North Korean officials usually talk. Usually what they say is, we will protect our homeland if there is any kind of threat. Whether or not that amounts to like a real substantive or long-term change in their posture, we don't really know yet. But as I would entirely expect China and North Korea to come out with some sort of statement decrying this, but I think for anybody trying to understand it, it's important to note that the U.S., South Korea, and Japan are not getting together planning to invade anybody. They are getting together planning to defend themselves, and in a bigger sense, defend what President Yoon really likes to call the rules-based international order, which is a concept that he keeps coming back to and seems to animate his interactions with both his counterparts in both the U.S. and Japan.
Good point.
Thank you.
Now, Malene, the three sides are trying to regularize their trilateral summit, possibly once a year thing, right? Why do the three sides feel the need to do so?
Well, I think generally it's because of the current world order. As we just talked about previously, there are a lot of issues regarding China, some regional instability right now in Asia in general, with China, with North Korea, and also the war between Russia and Ukraine is also having an impact on what's going on in Asia right now. So I think all of these reasons are very good reasons to explain this summit, and that it will continue for a few years. And another interesting aspect is that Yoon Suk-yeol has worked really, really hard to improve ties with Japan at the moment. So for many years, we have seen that there has been huge diplomatic issues between Japan and Korea. And now it seems like we have a Korean president who really, really wants to work and emphasizes to have a better relationship with Japan, which opens up for the possibility of these kind of summits. And there's also no denying that President Joe Biden is pushing for South Korea and Japan to have more cooperation and to also have more cooperation, just the two countries, against North Korea and against China.
Right, leaving things at good note for both bilateral ties and also trilateral relations at the moment. Now, Stephen, we do know that Fukushima wastewater release will not be topping the agenda at the trilateral summit, right? But the topic itself has been a headache. And now I know that you've been in Jeju to interview one of the female divers there who is concerned about the matter. Tell us more about that.
Yes, for viewers who are perhaps not familiar, these are kind of legendary figures on Jeju Island. These are mostly middle-aged women who spend their days diving for sometimes for hours at a time, and they're able to hold their breath for really long, and they have a lot of physical stamina where they can come up to the surface and take breaths and then go back down and grab sea urchins, I think they're called, and other kinds of sea life by hand that they then sell. So naturally they're concerned with the concept of a large amount of wastewater being put into the ocean, even though Fukushima is quite far away. I mean, there's a scientific debate over just how much effect this will have over the local ecosystem, and I'm not going to comment on that scientific debate because I don't know enough about it. But I did find it, just as a reporter, my job is animated by a belief that it is worth going places and talking to people in person, because from that you can gain a really special kind of insight, and you can get a sense of what people are thinking and get a sense of people's day-to-day life. So I did find it quite moving to see these women doing what, as someone who taps on a laptop for a living, seeing people whose lives are really dependent on the natural world, and for whom things like a clean environment is not just a kind of abstract concept. This is literally what they rely on for their livelihood. So this one diver gave me this interesting quote where she just kind of talked me through her day, and she said, like, over the course of a day, I go down and I come up, and I go down and I come up, and whether I want to or not, I end up drinking this water. Aww. It goes into my body. And she said, not just once, but many times a day, every day.
Right.
And she said, so like, isn't it logical for me to think that even if there is only a small amount of harmful materials in this water, like, isn't it reasonable for me to think that this is going to affect me in some way? And I think people in Korea, or maybe people in Taiwan, or people in Hong Kong, like, we're seeing some kinds of resistance popping up around the region. I think for some, it's kind of reasonable for them to think, like, my ecosystem, my livelihood is going to be changed in a way that I had no say in. These people had no, they were not in dialogue with the Japanese government about this. They were not in dialogue with the international authorities about this. And I understand their concerns, and as a kind of neutral observer, I just hope that this ends up not being an environmentally harmful thing, and that this tradition of haenyeo diving can continue in Jeju, because it's a special and really interesting kind of thing.
Right, it all matters because their livelihoods that depend on that ocean that could be possibly connected to that unfortunate wastewater. Yeah,
and Jeju is. Jeju is a real kind of unique place. I would encourage anybody who wants to come to Korea as a tourist to check Jeju out, because it's very different from the mainland. It has that kind of island sense of being independent and being self-contained and being unique from the rest of not just the country but the world. It's Jeju people speak with a certain kind of dialect, and there's certain kinds of food that they eat that are unique to the place. But when you talk to people there, you do get the sense that they consider themselves independent in some ways, but they also consider themselves to be quite dependent on the natural world and on specifically the ocean. Everywhere you go in Jeju, you can smell the ocean, and you can feel the breeze coming off of the coast. And there's a real intimate connection between the people who live there and the waters that surround them. So
you could easily be a Jeju correspondent.
Wow, hey, if any company wants to send me there, I'm happy.
All right, now let's move on to China, Malene. China recently allowed group tours overseas for the first time in nearly 3-4 years. Now, what's the motive behind the decision? Is it because they're done with the pandemic? What is it?
Well, I think experts claim that it is to revitalize the economy because China's economy has been struggling, and especially a lot of Chinese travel agencies that are hosting these group tours have been struggling a lot. So even though the tourists will go abroad, it will be organized by Chinese travel bureaus, and they really, really need that extra money. Moreover, actually, the group tours to South Korea will finally return as well, which is quite a surprise, since the group tours from China to South Korea have been stopped for almost 6 years, actually since 2017, because there have been some issues between South Korea and China after South Korea decided to incorporate the THAAD system, which is a defense system from the United States, which angered China so much that they decided to halt these group tours. However, now they're resuming them, and it seems that it is China's way of both boosting their own economy. South Korea is one of their closest neighbors, and many Chinese people are interested in traveling to Korea because of K-pop, because of the food, because of the close culture, and like maybe some of them sharing the same historical ties and some of the same feelings. And this may also be a way of China to try to change the Korean mindset about Chinese people at the moment. Because as we have seen in a lot of different surveys and so, it seems that many Korean people are not that fond of Chinese people. Actually, it seems that the anti-sentiments towards Chinese people in South Korea right now is bigger than the anti-sentiment be towards Japanese people. And for that reason, maybe China is hoping that by restoring these group tours, they can in some way improve the South Korean image of Chinese and also the Chinese people's image of South Koreans.
Indeed. So what you're saying is improving the sentiment among Chinese people on South Korea and the South Korean people, and also revitalizing the local economy.
Yes.
Then, Stephen, how is this good news for South Korea?
Before I get to South Korea specifically, I think that China has become such a big and powerful country that it affects so much of what goes on in the world. And I personally think we should welcome any sign from China to want to be more open and less isolated. So I think it's good that China is making this decision to let more Chinese people go abroad and see the rest of the world and interact with people in other countries. I get a little bit unnerved when I see a gesture from a big, powerful country to turn inwards and to want to, kind of care less about what happens elsewhere. So I think, in a general sense, this can be welcomed, but also specifically when it refers to South Korea, is like as Millie pointed out, public opinion in South Korea about China has really deteriorated in recent years, and that has to do with the air pollution here. That has to do with the economic coercion that China has carried out in some countries, including this one. So this could be a kind of modest step toward improving that. And I mean, it's hard to think, I was here before the THAAD issue played out, and the role of China and of Chinese tourism and of China, like interaction with China generally just seems to be growing and growing and growing in Korea, and the ties between the two sides were expanding and expanding, and then that all changed kind of suddenly. So there are certain sectors, tourism and a few others, cosmetics and retail and things that had grown to really orient themselves towards appealing to China's visitors and customers from China. They will be very happy at this news. In Myeongdong is probably, property values in Myeongdong are probably going up as we speak.
Right.
So just generally, as someone who's lived abroad a long time and who's traveled around the world a lot, I'm just a believer in human-to-human exchange. So this all seems like a good thing to me.
Yeah, I agree. Now, Malene, let's move on to the 2023 World Scout Jamboree that finally came to an end last week. Now, it was a more than 12-day event. It was a 12-day event full of drama related to all the weather hassle. Now, how's the foreign media outlets' overall evaluation on that event?
If I should sum it up in one word, I'm afraid that word would probably be failure. Because it seems that right from the beginning, this entire event has just not been managed well. Like we have seen so many of the scouts down with heat stroke. It was 500 after 2 days. There was not enough medical help. There was not enough cooling facilities, not enough places where people could rest. The toilet facilities were terrible. I have heard that they have even been said that they were resembling refugee camps. So it really, really seems like this has been a big failure for South Korea. Moreover, it also seems like these kind of news have been really, really picked up by foreign media. Even though some scouts have been out saying that it was a journey of their life and that they had a wonderful time, it seems to be the negative story and all the negative things that happened, even the things that seemingly was not Korea's fault, like for example the typhoon, no one can control the weather. However, the way that was dealt with, the way the scouts were evacuated have also caused trouble. There was a bus colliding, carrying scouts colliding with a local bus where a few, both scouts and locals, were injured. So it really seems like all in all this event has really, really not been managed well. It also appears that many of the funding that has been for this event, that has been 6 years in the making, have actually ended up on business tours that are seemingly completely unrelated to any kind of scout event. Maybe we're seeing a kind of corruption scandal in the making. And I also think that in the future, this will affect Korea's ability to host these kind of big global events. Like, for example, the prospects of holding the Busan World Expo might be damaged by this big failure of a scout camp.
I hate to say that it is seen as a failure. But Stephen, let's turn to you. What's your evaluation, or foreign media outlets' evaluation from your perspective?
Well, my big question was from the outset was, why did they decide to have it in the first week of August? Like, that's literally the hottest week of the year. Like, if anybody ever says to me, like, oh, I want to come visit you in Korea, I always say, don't come in July or August, because it's just too hot, it's too humid. You're just not going to have fun.
But the thing is, it's been held around this time of the year, and it's been just the horrible situation where the heat and all the wind and the rain came all together.
But it's always like the tone of surprise about the weather in some foreign media outlets I found kind of surprising, because it's like, do they not realize like I've lived in Korea for a bunch of years. Like, it's that particular week is the hottest week of the year. It's when the rainy season has ended.
Monsoon season.
Yeah, and the ground is saturated with rainwater, and then the sun comes out. And it's this like perfect storm of heat and humidity. So I felt like that was a flaw that was kind of built into the hosting of the event. Like, if I was involved in this event, I would have really raised concerns about that. I don't know I didn't really know anything about scouts before this. Is it perhaps that like built into the idea of scouting is like kind of roughing it outdoors, and like that you're enduring difficulties? Like, is that part of it? Because that might explain like why it was hosted in this pretty uncomfortable place, and like why they didn't have a big air-conditioned space, or like why they didn't have some of this other stuff that would have made this a lot more comfortable. Like, in one of the stories I did, like I quoted some Korean politician who got some flack online for saying like, oh, this is a sign of how young people are kind of fragile. And
no, we cannot blame that.
Well, I don't think we should. I'm not trying to blame anybody, but I'm just. I guess I'm just asking questions about like, what is the objective of a scouting event? Is it supposed to be really comfortable, or is it supposed to be kind of adventurous? Like, I don't know.
That's another story.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. So.
Well, what we do know is that we've gone through this experience, and we have learned the lessons to prepare more, even what we have done to host bigger events like the 2030 World Expo possibly, and also the World Youth Day in 2027.
Yeah, I don't know about World Youth Day, but I think something like World Expo is, Korea has successfully hosted 2 Olympics. It's successfully hosted a World Cup. I don't think big events are in any way beyond the capacity. But one thing that I think made this particular event challenging was that so much of it is outdoors. If you're hosting the World Expo, if you're hosting the Olympics, everybody's staying in a hotel. And if the weather's bad, you can just go back to your hotel.
All right. Thank you, Stephen, so much for your insight today. And also, Malene, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, that is all we have for today. We thank you for watching Issues and Insiders.